I call the Honourable the Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister.
Many millions of dollars, Madam Speaker. And what you don't like to hear, Madam Speaker, what the opposition doesn't like to hear is that we are still very much committed to our FOFA legislation, and it was introduced last week, right? But in terms of our overall deregulatory effort, it's $720 million. Now, you know from the document that we have put forward that in the Omnibus Bill there was a $13 million saving attached to that. And you also know that in the bills that we're discussing today, we're getting rid of more than 1,000 redundant acts. And you also know, Madam Speaker, the opposition also know that our $720 million figure is being verified in a public document based on costings by the Office of Best Practice Regulation, as well as by independent departments. And this is across a whole range of measures which has significantly reduced the amount of duplication that exists in the regulatory framework that currently is currently in place, and as well as the duplication that we have dealt with things like NOPSEMA, and the duplication that we are dealing with in terms of one-stop shops. I should remind the House that there's another piece of legislation which we've also introduced, which is extremely important in our deregulation framework, and that is to open up the Comcare scheme to ensure that companies you've asked me about our 720, Madam Speaker, the opposition asked me about our $720 million target. And the Comcare scheme will provide a saving of more than $30 million, because the Labor Party and its friends in the union movement ensured that when they first came to office at the end of 2007, there was a moratorium put on the Comcare scheme so that companies had to enter into expensive different systems in every state. They shake their heads opposite. They shake their heads opposite.
Madam Speaker, point of order.
There is no point of order. The member will resume his seat. The Parliamentary Secretary has the call. Do not argue with the chair. Take your seat.
Check the member for Watson should check the videotape, because his colleague at the front table was shaking his head because they're not because, Madam Speaker, the opposition is not interested in the substance of repeal day. Madam Speaker, the opposition wants to have a bet each way. On the one hand, Madam Speaker, the opposition is saying repeal day is just a stunt. You're getting rid of regulations that are decades old, which are having no impact out there on the real life. But on the other hand, Madam Speaker, those opposite get up there at the dispatch box and says, we disagree with what you're doing on the ACNC. Right? They're saying we're having a disagreement with what the government is doing on FOFA. We have a disagreement with what the government is doing on Comcare. We have a disagreement with what the government is doing in terms of cleaning services. Madam Speaker, I want the opposition to understand. Madam Speaker, in the more than 30-page document that we released publicly, it detailed more than 80 initiatives in the deregulation space, right?
The Parliamentary Secretary will resume his seat on the point of order.
During the debate on the second reading, a second reading amendment had been moved, which significantly broadened the scope of the debate. Now that we're in consideration in detail, that full breadth of relevance is no longer relevant to the debate. And while this would have been completely in order from the Parliamentary Secretary during the second reading debate, it's not relevant during the consideration in detail.
The Parliamentary Secretary will relate his comments to the bills before the House.
Okay.
But there is still, in consideration in detail, when you are answering propositions put by the opposition, scope for you to answer in the terms you see are relevant.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Well, in terms of the bills before the House, they have got rid of more than 1,000 redundant acts. in terms of the legislative changes that are contained in the Omnibus Bill. They will get rid of some of the duplication in the aged care space so that building certification,
and the time
for
has
example.
expired for this particular piece of answering.